Overtime back with you here, national radio host, Sports Map's own, and our good friend Jake Asman now joins us. Brand new show in the afternoons on ESPN Radio in Houston. Man, you must be doing something right, Jake. They just keep giving you more opportunities, man. They take opportunities away from me, man. I'm glad you're getting good ones.
I appreciate that, brother. Well, thank you. Thank you for the kind words and for having me. And, basically they say, hey, do you want to do this? I usually just say yes. So sometimes I regret those decisions, but getting the chance to be on in the afternoon in Houston every day on the ESPN station 97.5 down here. It's been fun so far. We're 3 shows in. I'm working with 2 great co-hosts, and Cody Stutz and BK Brad Kellner, and we're having a good time so far. My wife always used to do that too. She always used to tell everybody yes, and then she made the mistake of saying yes to me, and she's regretted that for the last 10 years. So there's times where you can't get out of those things, Jake. You're right, and I feel bad for your wife. I'm sorry. You should. So does everyone else that listens to the show. Jake Asman with us here on the ESPN 102.3 AM 1000 hotline. Let's start in Texas, and I actually want to go with the Deshaun Watson situation first, right there in your backyard in Houston. What's the latest from the Texans' perspective in regards to a trade, and do you see any resolution on this by the time we get to week 1? I do not. Yeah, I think the latest is honestly there's not much has changed here, unless there is some sort of clarity with the legal situation, right? I mean, Deshaun Watson, let's say, hypothetically settles all 22 of the civil cases against him. And then the NFL says, okay, he settled the cases. What's our suspension going to be? Are we going to suspend him? And there's some clarity between now and the 24 days from the start of the NFL's regular season. I just don't see any scenario where he's going to get traded. The thing to watch right now is, does he get placed on the commissioner's exempt list, which is essentially paid leave, before the start of the season? Right now, the NFL has said there's no restrictions on him. If Deshaun Watson hypothetically said, you know what, I want to play for the Texans this year, I'll be the quarterback again, technically he's allowed to do that. There's nothing saying that he can. But the thing to watch is the NFL going to place him on the exempt list? So that would be paid leave, and then he'd be off the Texans' hands as far as a roster spot, because that's the big conversation right here in Houston right now. If Deshaun Watson doesn't want to play for the Texans, okay, fine. But what do they do with his roster spot? I don't think it's personally fair to the Texans that they would have to use one of their 53 roster spots on a guy that's never going to play for them again. So that's the conversation down here. And, as far as when he gets traded, I still maintain my stance, and just talking to people in the know, unless the Texans get a massive offer for Watson, they're not going to trade him for 10 cents on the dollar. They still look at it like he's 25 years old. He's going to be 26 next week. And this is a guy that will eventually play football once again. So if he's going to play once again, you can't get railroaded on any trade. You already lost the DeAndre Hopkins trade because of Bill O'Brien. The last thing you can afford to do is trade Deshaun Watson and not get a premium for a guy that's arguably a top 5 player at his position in the sport. Obviously, the Texans have a quarterback conundrum there, and I don't know if that's how maybe Dallas, if they were going to be, completely honest with us, would talk about the shoulder situation with Dak and just him coming back from that major injury as a conundrum. How would you classify the situation with Dak Prescott right now in Dallas? Yeah, I would be concerned anytime you talk about a quarterback that was already coming off injury and then obviously has had to get an MRI multiple times looking at his shoulder. I mean, anytime you hear that, a football team is contacting a baseball team to inquire about potential injuries or potential treatments for that said injury, like the Cowboys contacted the Texas Rangers, that would concern me just a little bit if I was a Cowboys fan. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's doom and gloom. Dak's never playing again this season. But anytime you talk about a guy coming off injury and now a player that's never dealt with any sort of issue with the shoulder is now dealing with something, that's a big concern right there. And obviously, anytime a player has to get an MRI, they're not sticking you in that MRI tube for nothing. They're doing due diligence. So until we get some clarity on what exactly the timeline looks like for Dak, I would be a little worried just about the status of his shoulder going forward. Jake Asman with us here, ESPN Radio in Houston, Sports Map radio host. Let's jump on over to the rookie quarterbacks throughout the league. What'd you make of the storylines that came from their debuts in week 1 of the preseason? I'm talking about those that were drafted there in the first round. Yeah, I thought Justin Fields looked great. I want to put it in context, though, because he's obviously going up against, a bunch of second and third stringers. Everyone always makes the same joke. He's playing up against guys that will likely be selling insurance. in a couple weeks. So I think you got to put it in perspective. But he looked good, and the preseason, every fan base feels very excited about their young players every year. That's just how it works. I thought Trevor Lawrence showed some signs of why he was the first overall pick in his start. Zach Wilson, to me, played really well for the Jets in his first game. Now, the Giants didn't really play any of their key starters, so you put that in context. But Wilson looked good, made some big throws on third and long, which were impressive. But I think overall, it's everyone's always looking for like the instant gratification with players. And the reality is this: it's going to take time. It's probably going to take multiple seasons to truly know what these quarterbacks end up being. I mean, did anyone think Josh Allen was going to be, the first quarterback from the 2018 class to sign a massive extension? I mean, it certainly didn't look like that was going to happen after his first 2 years with the Bills. So you got to put everything in perspective when it comes to young quarterbacks. They're going to have highs. They're going to have lows. I always go back to this saying, JT, success is not always linear. There's going to be some ups and downs on the way. And I bet you a lot of these quarterbacks that we're talking about now, a bunch of them are going to work out, and there's always a couple that don't. That's just how it goes in the NFL.
That certainly is, man, and that's a true statement for a lot of NFL careers, not just at the quarterback position. When we talk about the teams that were great a year ago on the NFC side, Green Bay, Tampa Bay, of course in the NFC title game. On the AFC side of things, is it still the Chiefs and then everybody else, or do you see it differently with the way the Bills had moved up the ladder a year ago, the way the Titans have played, or others? Is it more wide open in the NFC than ever before? Would you say on the AFC side of things it's similar?
Yeah, I would look at it like this in the AFC. Until somebody beats the Chiefs, they obviously have to be the favorite. They have arguably the best roster, and they have the best quarterback in the sport in Patrick Mahomes, as everybody knows. But I'll say this, it's really hard to go to 3 straight Super Bowls, right? So you would think somebody could potentially beat the Chiefs. Like, the odds are against the Chiefs going back to the Super Bowl if you just look at NFL history, how hard it is to actually do that. So that'd be the one thing I'd say about the AFC. I think the Bills and Browns are both very good. I think you can't discredit what the Ravens have done. I think you got to look at what Tennessee has done, adding Julio Jones and seeing what they are, if they could build upon what they've been the last couple seasons. So I don't just say it's Chiefs and everybody else. I think they're the best team, but they're due for a year where maybe they don't go to the Super Bowl. And then you look at the NFC. Obviously, you have Tampa, you have the Packers. You can make a case for the Rams and the Seahawks, and we'll find out just what the Niners are with Garoppolo or Trey Lance. But I think the NFC, it's probably more wide open, but I still look at the AFC and just go, man, it's really hard if you're the Kansas City Chiefs to go to a Super Bowl for the 3rd year in a row.
That's a great point. Jake Asman with us here on the ESPN 102.3 hotline. Finally, man, I want to jump over to some basketball quick here for a second. And we've seen, free agency all settle down and everything that's happened with those moves throughout the NBA. Had you had a chance to hear the comments from Draymond Green and Kevin Durant about the Warriors breakup?
I did, yeah. It was, I'll say this: it was fascinating to see just how candid both guys were about how all that went down.
That's the thing too, Ed. I wanted to bring up. Oftentimes we see when things get broken up because teams are bad, it's not usually about animosity. It's usually that everybody looks around and they realize this isn't working. We're not winning. They reference The Last Dance, but I mean, we could go through our own favorite teams. We could go through teams that we've covered, and we could find breakups where it felt like they could still win more. And it usually goes back to relationships. Isn't it interesting in sports, Jake, how oftentimes, whether it's the successes of a team or the failures of a team, it's a lot like the regular world that we live in. And you probably are experiencing with the opportunities you're getting there. You're good at your job, but the relationships are also what spur in those next opportunities. And in the case of the Warriors, those seemingly were shut down because of the way that Bob Myers and Steve Kerr handled the situation. And they maybe could have won more, just like the Bulls could have won more.
Yeah, no doubt. But usually when a great team breaks up, it's for more than just one reason, right? Like KD could come out and say, oh, well, he didn't like how Bob Myers and Steve Kerr handled all that. But ultimately, Kevin Durant and Draymond Green are adults. They're grown men. So if they needed to get it all out and figure it out, then maybe they should have done that. So, you look at The Last Dance, like everyone wanted to blame Jerry Krause, and unfortunately he's no longer with us, so he couldn't even be interviewed in that documentary. But the blame should also fall on Jerry Reinsdorf, the Bulls owner, for allowing that to happen in the first place, right? I mean, egos a lot of times can wreck relationships, as we've seen in sports and sports radio with teams. So, it's always, there's usually never just one person or one reason why in sports a great team breaks up. It's usually a very complex issue, and I think it's a lot more than just, oh, KD didn't like what Bob Myers and Steve Kerr did after the Draymond and KD fight after that Clippers game a few years ago.
Jake Asman with Sports Map Radio, ESPN Radio Afternoons in Houston. Thanks for kicking it with us this Thursday, Jake. Always appreciate it, man.
Anytime, JT. Thanks for having me.
Be well.